If I were to take my dog and like put him in a box for a whole year, I'd probably go to jail for that. But they think that that's okay to do to human beings. So it's not easy knowing that someone that you love is in a box, with no sunlight, no contacts. I pray for him, that his mind doesn't go, because that's meant to really affect a person's mind. So I pray that that he stays sane.
Over the last 2 decades, New York, like a lot of states, has seen a tremendous increase in the use of extreme isolation, or what a lot of people commonly refer to as solitary confinement. Currently, there are approximately 5,000 extreme isolation beds in about 39 different prisons spread all throughout New York State. We set to figure out what exactly happens inside of these extreme isolation cells, and what are the costs, both inside and outside prison walls.
Before Damo was incarcerated, when he was put in the box specifically, I just thought that, for people who were misbehaved, they went to the box for a month, 2 months, 3 months. I never knew that they put them there for that as long as they do.
I think when you talk to people who have been through it, they're not the same as when they went in. I think the box does nothing but hurt. It's harmful, it's torture. You don't get any skills in there. You're just, you feel less than human from, the accounts that I've heard from my son and from Carlos. And what skills are you possibly learning in there? Nothing. So coming home is even worse of a transition. I think not only for Carlos, but for a son who's also dealing with being in solitary, we can give, but only so much, because there's been so much damage.
The thing that I worry about when he comes out, though, is if he'll still have that mentality, that says, I'm an animal, because I've been treated that way. If we build people up, then we help ourselves, and I wish I would see more of that rehabilitation, so that when they come out, they're not going back in. And when they come out, they can actually contribute, in a productive way.
The darkest moments, sadly to say, is every day. Because first of all, I never know as a mother if my son is still alive. And I also don't know whether or not Carlos or my son, once we're back in the same household, what's that gonna look like? How much do we have to put into trying to fix and mend and understand and be gentle? How much healing time will there be, if any?
Well, extreme isolation inflicts psychological and emotional harm on all individuals, regardless of their mental stability. But for super vulnerable people, like those with pre-existing mental health issues or juveniles, it can be devastating and potentially life-threatening.
Now that I'm back in upstate Colfo solitary, I toss, turn, and wake up several times a night due to the banging, screaming, crying and cursing. I toss and turn and wake up several times at night. I feel like I'm developing some kind of schizophrenia behavior. I hear the voices echoing as I try to fall asleep. I feel like I'm developing some kind of schizophrenia. Voices echoing as I try to fall asleep.
Since he was younger, there was always a little something different about Carlos. I'm not sure when he was first diagnosed, but I think it was later on in his teenage years or early 20s. And he already had a mental illness which was exasperated by being in prison and then by being put into a box where his hallucinations and his thoughts just developed more. Felt like society had threw him away and didn't care about him. He's described it vividly as just being a small box that sometimes gets smaller. It was an absolute hell for him, he said, because he couldn't get out. He would scream, attempted suicide many times. I mean, his wrists are cut. He just wanted out because of the hallucination. One of the scenarios he remembers vividly, the light socket, the metal melted and it transformed into a person in front of him. He's frozen with fear and there's no one to help him. So you say that you have a mental illness and you need help. The guards will treat you differently. You will be abused more so. Sometimes people just suffer in silence.
Our project communicated with over 100 different men who are incarcerated in extreme isolation, and we found across the board that many of them experience the same types of emotional and psychological effects after spending time in extreme isolation. These effects included anxiety, depression, uncontrollable impulses, and rage. And oftentimes these effects fueled irrational outbursts of aggression or violence.
The way I can describe the mood swings I had while locked in a cell upstate is they were kind of like the temper tantrums I threw as a child. Raw and helpless moments of overwhelming and unchangeable emotions exploding out of me. I was anxious and overly frustrated because I couldn't seem to function properly. And then I would get so annoyed with my bunkmates that I would just beat on them or scream at them. And afterward I would feel so horrible that they were kind of like the temper tantrums I threw as a child. I knew it wasn't right, but at the same time I couldn't control it either. The guilt from this behavior is what actually pushed me over the edge and made me feel like I didn't deserve to live.
My son had described it as the walls were filthy, feces all over and dried urine. The mattress they gave him was less than an inch. Really he actually slept on the floor rather than the mattress. At first they didn't give him any blanket. The blanket they gave him was really thinned out. Had holes in it. The toilet was stopped up. Just really disgusting. They're not getting food to eat. They get showers twice a week. Treated like he was garbage and he didn't matter. Slapped in the face, punched in the face and the eye. Not allowed to see medical. They would tell him, you're not shit, you don't matter. There was an infestation of bed bugs. And it was cold. It was cold. He was always cold. Oh my God, and as a mother, your kid being hungry and cold and locked in a room, and like you can't do anything about it, I visualized it every night. There are things that I know when he comes home that I am not going to have the right ingredients to mend him.
Extreme isolation damages prisoners. It causes severe emotional and psychological trauma and harm. Many of these effects are lasting and will remain with prisoners when they return to the general prison population or when they return home to their family and friends.
Then I get depressed. Being in here is changing and start having mood swings and snapping on people when they talk to me. Being in here is changing me in a way I don't want to change.
This is what we're making. So these young people are going in, nothing's happening rehabilitative wise like people say. They're coming out really angry at a system that threw them away and harmed them.
The way the disciplinary process works is, in the prison system, there are many, many different rules. And prisoners who violate any one of those rules can potentially be sentenced to extreme isolation. DOCS has claimed that the men that end up in extreme isolation are the most violent and dangerous prisoners in the general prison population, but we found that that simply was not the case. Only 16% of sentences to extreme isolation were for violent misbehavior, specifically assault or weapons.
When David first went to prison in January 2011, I didn't hear from him for a couple of weeks, and I didn't know when he had arrived. I was told a counselor would call me and all of that. I didn't hear from him. I became concerned. I called downstate, and they told me on the phone he was in the box. And he got in there the day he went in. He tried to take Suboxone in with him. And so they gave him 30 days in the box. 30 days for bringing in a prescription drug. And that's when I first learned the box is used for anything. It's the first line of punishment. So when he got the sentence of 6 months for writing to his girlfriend, I thought this is just more of the same. They are using Tier 3 tickets and the box as a first line of punishment, not even considering whether it's violent or non-violent. That doesn't even matter. If it's violent, I don't know what they do. I guess it's a longer sentence. I don't understand the mentality of treating everyone like the worst criminal who's in there, like the mass murderer who's a true sociopath. This is someone who committed a nonviolent drug crime. Can they take a moment just to assess him and say, you know, that he doesn't need this?
We've been through this before. New York experimented with extreme isolation back in the 19th century, and that experiment found that its use was extremely harmful, totally unnecessary, and that experiment was quickly abandoned. Yet here we are again, in the midst of another human rights crisis. New York's use of extreme isolation today is just as arbitrary and unnecessary as it was back in the 19th century. There are real alternatives to extreme isolation to protect safety both inside and outside our prisons.
Extreme isolation is a human rights violation. It's inhumane, it causes prisoner trauma and suffering, and we need to change it now.
Well, I don't know what the purpose of incarceration is supposed to be, but it destroys spirits, and not just a spirit, spirits of humanity, communities. It affects the world as a whole. It's inhumane on that level. It's not just small pockets of people that are affected. It's a worldwide issue. It's torture.
Because the system is dehabilitative rather than rehabilitative, I think that the effect that has on prisoners, you just have a large population of people whose minds are in the same place as when they went in, you know. So why not take the time that they are already, you know, sentenced to and rehabilitate?
It was bad when they're in prison. That's really bad. But it raises it to a new level when they're in the box. You're driving away and you feel as though you're leaving them in harm's way. So I'm leaving knowing there's nothing I can do. I just have to drive home. And you live moment to moment, day to day.